Lizard Demon says, what do you have to say about the argument that anarchism against all form of polity? It's false. So your proposition of consensus direct democracy is self-subjugation from the anarchist perspective. It's incorrect. It's just wrong. That is a made up definition. It comes from mutualists. Specifically, I think it comes from Kevin Carson. It has no foundation in anarchism other than the anarchism of Kevin Carson, which is fine. I mean, he can hold that perspective, but it's not the anarchist perspective, or rather it's not definitive of the anarchist perspective. Polities are pretty much literally impossible to avoid. You will always develop polities. I don't believe in the conception of a non-polity society or a society that functions without polities. Every society has always contained polities. If you go all the way back to indigenous societies, that was the village councils or village communes. Those were polities. As soon as you get enough groups of people together and you're coordinating enough people together, you will have the necessity for generalized forms of decision-making. Therefore, you will create bodies where generalized decision-making takes place. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just straight up just not true. It's not self-subjugation. It's just coordination. There's nothing special. Think about it this way. Let's imagine every task that a society could need to conduct, let's imagine there were 5 of them. There's not. Well, let's imagine there were 5. Okay? Let me ask a question. Why would it be a problem for us to decide all 5 of those tasks together instead of us deciding them all one thing at a time? Why is it necessary that we split those 5 tasks up and make them in 5 different bodies if we don't want to? Why is it self-subjugation for us to make decisions about all 5 tasks in the same body? I would argue it literally isn't. There's no difference. There's no difference if I make all 5 tasks in the same body, or if I make 4, or if I make 3, or if I make 2, or if I make 1 in all of them by themselves, or if I make 3 over here and 2 over here, or whatever. That combination doesn't matter. It's not relevant. The only thing it might do is that when we split them up into separate bodies, they will often become less effective. They will be less coordinated. That's all that's going to happen. If it's found that people can make decisions that way, I don't see any problem. But let's just be deadly honest. When we're coordinating things, the scales of regions and continents and the planet, we absolutely 110% will be using generalized bodies of decision-making where there's not some clear delineated purpose for which if that purpose ceases, it goes away. Because the truth is that there will just always be new decisions that need to be made, new problems that have to be decided. Why should it be that if I have a decision that needs to be made, if I want to coordinate some task together with a bunch of people in my region, that I should, for some reason, let's imagine that task is a new task, that there's not a body that's been created for it beforehand. Why? Why do I need to create a brand new body for it? In what way does that empower me? All it does is make it harder for me to coordinate. There's no good reason why that should take place in some separate new body rather than taking place in some generalized body where we've all agreed to come together and make decisions together. There's no good reason why we should start from the presumption that everybody has to be specific to the exact thing it is dealing with, rather than why can't me and 50 people decide that this is the place where we're going to come together and we're going to make all the big important decisions? And then if we want to create working groups, if we want to make places where just those decisions are made, if we want to make the temporary bodies that deal with some specific problem, we can. That's totally possible. That both can be done in that. In the version where we have generalized bodies which delegate working groups, we can have both specific temporary bodies and permanent generalized bodies. and we retain complete power in both examples. But in the version where we are only allowed to have specific temporary bodies that only deal with a specific thing, number one, we are disempowered. Number two, how is that consent? Why I'm not allowed to come together and make generalized decisions with people? Like, let's give the example of Cooperation Tulsa. Cooperation Tulsa needs to carry out all kinds of things. You know, we do food sovereignty. So that means that we do farming. That means that also sometimes we also do direct distribution of assets such as like Plan B. You know, we do all kinds of stuff. We do all kinds of different things. Are we an oppressive polity form because we make a bunch of different kinds of decisions, because we make generalized decisions? Is that somehow self-oppression? Would we be better off if for some reason we wanted to split the group into 15 separate groups where it's literally just all the same people for some reason having 15 meetings instead of one meeting? It's nonsensical in my opinion, and it has literally no logical basis, and it also has no strong basis in a power structural metadynamical analysis. I think it's unnecessary, and I think that it is part and parcel of a mutualist framework where what they want is no sort of mutual governance. They just want a bunch of workplaces and firms essentially to govern everything themselves. And for us to just have like provisional, specific, dynamical organizations, which to me, once again, makes no sense and is purposeless and harms coordination. So let's imagine it from another angle. Let's think of it from another angle of why it's also nonsensical. Let's imagine I am an organization that, I don't know, sells a product. I sell product X. Okay. So product X, it involves a bunch of auxiliary processes. Product X requires that I have pre-products that help me make product X. And that comes from a bunch of different people. Okay. And it gets distributed to a bunch of people that want product X. Okay. And that requires logistics from a bunch of people who have a bunch of surrounding skills. Okay. Where is my demanded compartmentalization here? Under which process do I have to compartmentalize? Do I have to compartmentalize the firm level? Can I compartmentalize the entire supply chain? Because now, if I expand, now I'm expanding out where I contain the entire supply chain where everybody makes decisions together. Okay, well, that's pretty well permanent. That's not temporary, that's permanent, because the supply chain will continue, especially if it's something like food. Okay, so now what if I also want it to involve the logistics? Now, because it involves the logistics, what if I need to include, paving streets and creating roads? Now, what if I also want this to include the sort of rules and regulations that are expected from how people will act in these areas? At which point have I included so many functions that now it's too generalized? Now it's called a polity form. I argue that this is a non-existent boundary. I argue that this is a nonsensical standard that comes from a fear of structure and a veiled anti-organizationalism, which is inimical to our success. That will never work, and it is essentially a denial of what does work. It is an embrace of an affinity model that has been failing for decades now. The affinity model, this idea of just, I'm going to make a group that's just about this one little task, and then, okay, well, we're done with the task now, and the group disappears, and then we have to start from scratch next year when somebody wants to do the literal exact same task. It is a waste of energy. Startup energy is hard, y'all. Starting things up is hard. Beginning things anew takes a lot of energy. And if we just keep letting things dissolve and then creating them anew and then dissolve and then creating them anew, that is an enormous waste of energy. I think that it is impractical, incoherent, and theoretically false. That's my perspective.